pollster Frank Luntz recently hosted a focus group with Gen Z voters, excuse me, ages 18 to 24 from around the country. I want to show you what they had to say about capitalism versus socialism. It's eye-opening.
Socialism, because I think, frankly, capitalism is destroying our planet, where shareholders are going after profits at the expense of our environment, at the expense of the lives of humans.
Ultimately, capitalism is what makes America, so sought after. It's why everybody wants to come here, not the other way around.
Capitalism encourages the exploitation of people. I think capitalism supports people who are already at the top.
I'm actually the son of Cuban refugees, so I understand firsthand how the dangers of socialism, and specifically its link to authoritarianism, can really destroy a country.
Join us right now.
Today, I want to talk about capitalism versus socialism. From the perspective of Gen Z, what you just saw was a clip from a focus group that was conducted by a political scientist by the name of Frank Luntz. And I thought this was very interesting because his perspective on the focus group and what I actually heard were actually very different. So I would like to continue watching the clip and react to it. So let's just continue on with the clip. Give me 1 second to turn it on.
Was pollster and political strategist Frank Luntz. He was the one who conducted that focus group, and it was pretty remarkable. I watched a large portion of it. Were you surprised by the language?
The language, I was surprised. I was not surprised about the conclusion. Young people are always to the left. But when they use a word like exploitation, when they talk about corruption or greed, those send off bells to me, and I'm warning Washington, D.C., that all this anger and all this frustration with the economy,
right?
No, it's not good. No, it's not working for them. And you better pay attention to this, because these young people are not just writing off politicians. That's
right.
the easy thing to do.
But here's the question then. Is the answer, when you say the government needs to be watching, right, that folks in Congress and the Senate need to be watching, there is a view among some which is that to make it work for the American people better than it is today, the answer isn't necessarily capitalism per se, but it is, and it may be even more socialistic perspective, which is that we need to get more money into the hands of these people. And the question, of course, is how do you do that?
Well, the key for them is that road, that opportunity, that direction. And all they're asking for is a fighting chance. And if they see Washington behaving in such ways to deny them that chance, to tax them so much, to regulate them so much, the litigation, all these things that are happening, the capitalism is undermining our faith, our trust, and our confidence.
Is that what you found, though, in the focus group itself?
In the focus group itself, they want to know that it is a level playing field. So basically, they want to take us back. I hate to use the phrase for Reaganomics, take us back to the 1980s, 1990s, when people had a chance to move ahead. They had a chance to invest. They admire entrepreneurs. They admire small business owners, family businesses they admire. The big corporations, not so much.
Right.
And I wish that the business community also paid attention
When
to
Reagan
this.
said that only one generation at a time can understand that capitalism is what works, and we can't pass it down through our genes for our next generation.
But we have to teach it, and that's the
what
problem.
I mean. That's what he said.
In our schools, they're not, in colleges now, they teach socialism. They tell the students that you're not getting a fair shake.
Do they teach what socialism, now socialism and communism are not the same thing, but sometimes one results in the other, it usually results in about 10 or 50 million people dead. I mean, we've tried this.
Well,
we haven't done it right yet. Is it the same old excuse? We've tried socialism, we just haven't done it right yet, right?
no, because I'm separating the politics. That's easy to get agitated.
I don't want to get agitated.
This
I've
is
just
the
had 2
core
weeks
of
off.
our economy.
Let's show, because this speaks to some of this. Let's show.
Guys, I think it's very interesting some of the points that are made here. For one, the way this is framed, or the way that they're framing it, is as if socialism is something that doesn't work, and Reaganomics capitalism is something that is the only solution. When in fact, one could argue that Reaganomics, which Frank Luntz refers to, has been an utter failure. And in fact, what he's hearing from his focus group is people desperately trying to figure out alternatives. And it's also interesting that he starts history in a certain way in the 1980s. Why doesn't Frank Luntz start history in the 1930s under FDR when we had the so-called New Deal? This was a moment in which the United States, for the first time, saw a real middle class. Up until then, the United States did not have a serious middle class. It was a country that was highly unequal, and it was only after the New Deal, after World War II, the 50s, the 60s, and 70s, that a tremendous middle class emerged. And that's really when the American dream was possible in the United States. Now, that American dream excluded African Americans and other minorities. It wasn't until the 1960s that we had a civil rights movement. And that's really when, in the 1970s, we started to see the formation of what could be possibly an American dream. But of course, that's when Frank Luntz's hero, Ronald Reagan, came to power, and he ended the New Deal. Let me be clear, the New Deal was a moment in which it was realized that in order to sort of scare off communism, we would have to reinvigorate capitalism in a way that it would work for all, right? It had to work for all. So things like Social Security came out of the New Deal, a minimum wage came out of the New Deal, the right to have unions. Up into the 1980s, unions were on the upswing. Unions, the ability for collective bargaining, workers to come together and fight for a fair wage, was something that was allowed in the country. And a good deal of the private sector had unions, up to 25%. And they really set the pace for the average worker, right? This was a moment that made the US possible, but that moment required certain socialistic aspirations, right? Certain collective ideas that workers could, one, come together, that there were certain standards. You had to regulate the workforce, workers have certain rights, right? These were all very important. So I think it is important when we talk about communism or socialism, we really allow for alternatives to be possible, not to cascade capitalism or socialism, but to look at different ideas that ultimately will do what? Make life better for all people. Make life better for all people. If you live in the United States, that means better for all of the people, regardless of their race, their ethnicity, their gender, that they're all included. They have health care, they have higher education, that is accessible to them, that they have a good K through 12 education, and they have benefits in a way that they can live. That was the idea of the New Deal. What I'm hearing from these young people in Generation Z, or better known as Gen Z, is they're willing to experiment and find a new way, just like FDR was, right? In the 1980s, we've seen what's happening now. A bit of fear, um, also corruption in government systems that don't really work. Um, and so there was a reactionary moment in the 1980s. In the 1930s, the same thing was, we were just coming out of a stock crash in 1929, and enormous inequality existed in the United States. You had the robber barons, few wealthy people, and majority of people impoverished, no real serious middle class. And what they saw was they wanted something new. So they chose a new deal over fear. This is what we have to do again. We need a new deal over fear. Will that be capitalism or will that be socialism? I think we have to be dynamic and really, really look to something new, new ideas. Before I go, I want to leave us with one of, I think, the most important, not just civil rights leader or quote unquote race leaders, but one of the most important intellectuals of the 20th century. And that was the guy by the name of Martin Luther King. You might have heard of him. I want to take a quote from a letter he wrote. This letter he actually wrote to his wife, Coretta Scott King. I want to read some of this letter because I think the letter is something very, very interesting. So let me just get to it here, see if I can get to the letter. So he says in the letter, I have just completed Bellamy's Looking Backwards. It was both stimulating and fascinating. There can be no doubt about it. Bellamy had the insight of a social prophet as well as the fact-finding mind of the social scientist. I welcome the book because much of its content is in line with my basic ideas. I imagine you already know that I am much more socialistic in my economic theory than capitalistic. This is Martin Luther King in a letter to his wife. And yet I am not so opposed to capitalism that I have failed to see its relative merits. It started out with a noble and high motive to block the trade monopolies of nobles, but like most human systems, it fell victim to the very thing it was revolting against. So today, capitalism has outlived its usefulness. It has brought about a system that takes necessities from the masses to give luxury to the classes. I guess when he says to the classes, I, he's talking about the elite. But anyway, back to King. He says, I think Bellamy is right in seeing the gradual decline of capitalism. I think you notice that Bellamy emphasized that that would be evolutionary rather than revolutionary. This, it seems to me, is the most sane and ethical way for social change to take place. This, it will be remembered, is one of the points at which socialism differs from communism. the former emphasizing evolution and the latter revolution. Communists would insist that means justify the end. Right? So this is King. He's talking in the 1960s. At this point, you have the Soviet Union, which was the leading communist state. It no longer exists. And Cuba had just come about some years ago. So he says, so if killing 1,000 people would bring about a good end, the act is ethically justifiable. It is at the point that I'm radically opposed to communism, right? So he is against communism in that way. Today, I'm sure he would be against Venezuela and in many aspects of the kind of dictatorship that still remains in Cuba or North Korea, right? These are all places that purport to be communist. King never supported such places, and I'm sure he wouldn't support them now, right? Destructive means cannot bring about constructive ends. The means does not necessarily justify the end, for I would insist that the end is pre-existent in the mean. Again, this is King. Also, I am quite bitterly opposed to the metaphysical structure of communism as well as Marxism. It is based on what is known as dialectical materialism. I, being an idealist rather than materialist, would therefore reject Marx at this point. So, King had not all the way bought into socialism. Sorry, he had not bought all the way into communism, but he was not opposed to many socialistic aspects of the society. And he looked at economics in a critical way. He was not religious about or dogmatic about religion. He was a Christian, that was his religion. And that meant questions about ethical questions, morality, right? He was philosophically about what a good society would look like. He took that very seriously. And I think we should take it seriously too. You get the sense at that table, the host and the people on his panel were all enthusiastic, dogmatic capitalists. Not only capitalists, but a certain type of capitalist, a Ronald Reagan capitalist, very dogmatic. But what you get a sense from the clip I showed of the focus group is that that dogmatism is not there. Indeed, the youth seem to be interested in new alternatives, not the same old tired dogma of Ronald Reagan capitalism. Can't we get something new? Can I get some new ideas? Why do we keep stuck on those ideas? What will be good for the masses? How do we build a middle class? How do we deliver health care to all? How do we provide an educational system that will provide jobs for all? Right? How do we end homelessness? Let's take these questions seriously. Why do we act as if there are no solutions? We know there are solutions. They might require sacrifices from some of us, but that sacrifice wouldn't really destroy the value of our lives. And I'm talking about those in the elite classes. So I think the message to Gen Z is to keep an open mind and to critically examine all alternatives. So I think I'm going to leave you guys with that. And you've been in class with Dr. T.